Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We are live from the rooftop at the Martinez Hotel. This is a conversation on Brands Meet AI. I'm delighted to introduce a wonderful guest today. My name is Ollie Saunders. I look after the addressable product for Wavemaker, and I'm also involved in the Group M addressable product formation and distribution as well. And I will leave it to my guest to introduce herself. So Silke, over to you.
Thank you. Very nice to be here. It's fantastic. I'm Silke Zetsche. I'm the commercial director of AudioStack. AudioStack is a 5-year-old AI audio production tool. And I've been with them for the last 6 months. Before I headed up dynamic audio creative, so very much in the creative space, creative tech space. And yeah, delighted to be here.
Wonderful to have you here. So we have been working together for some time, and I think it's really coming together through the lens of AI and what is now possible. And that brings with it an enormous amount of opportunity and some pitfalls and challenges. And I think the advertising space is working through the very beginnings of those challenges. And so I thought what we might do today is just explore some of those challenges and kick the tires around how brands and indeed our own colleagues can navigate those. So let's kick off with, first of all, the people versus AI trend. Is it friend or foe AI? Is it threat or opportunity? There's clearly a process ahead of getting people up to speed with that, getting people comfortable with AI, how to explore it, touch it, work it into their advertising campaigns, both on the brand side but also on the colleague side. How do you think about that, and how can we encourage our clients to get more AI conversant?
I think that's a big question, and I think it's probably personalized to the individual that you will have that conversation with. And the reason why I'm saying this is perhaps from my perspective as a person that thrives on innovation or new things that come to the market, new opportunities that brands or agencies like yourselves can explore. But then you put yourself into the shoes of potentially a creative producer or a creative that suddenly sees AI potentially as a threat. That's a different conversation. I do, however, think that there are more opportunities from my perspective than there are threats when it comes to AI. And how do we get more people? I think Wavemaker has this great statement of positively provocating. And I think if we as an industry or individuals are more bolder to experiment, to perhaps take more risk also with our clients, potentially that's something where we can explore more on the journey and experience and have experiences that I would actually say, well, I've tried this, it didn't work, so I can now move on. So to consistently evaluate and evolve from any angle in this ad industry.
I like that. I agree with something you said at the beginning, which is sort of, it's a spirit of exploration. And you're someone who explores. I'm definitely exactly the same. And I've found AI an enticing opportunity. I'm intrigued by it. I'm curious about what it can do, and so I play around with it. How would you recommend that clients get started on that journey? What's the way to sort of put the first foot of exploration forward?
Very good question. I mean, I feel like there are so many different things, but I think the first thing is, well, what is AI, and what would be the purpose for that specific individual at a brand? So if it's a marketing person at a brand, potentially what are some of the use cases? And there are so many different, we're in Cannes, most of the topics I think here are supported or elaborated by AI. I think being open, and brands have such opportunity to also take the expertise of an agency like yourself to educate themselves more. What are some of the use cases that fit for them, that solve some of their pain points that they might have? Because I do think when we see AI as more of a tooling, what can this tool help me with? So I can be more efficient, more faster, or even more creative. But so that I don't have to do those tasks that potentially are repetitive. I'll tell you a really interesting story. I actually used to work for Wavemaker when it was still MEC back in the day. And I was part of the digital team, and they introduced their first kind of electronic finance system. And we were my team was the first one that tested it out. And it was really difficult because it was the first stages to adopting an electrical financing system, to put your media plan on it and then put that through. But it's I love that. Although it was painful, I love that because ultimately 6 months along the line, it was a breeze. And I know this was 10 years ago, and it probably you would never use that again, but it's that involvement of putting yourself into something that you feel maybe uncomfortable with, but then you learn through it, and I think you explore more, you have more knowledge, you feel more elaborate, and I also feel like you can contribute to more conversations.
That's very interesting, and I suppose it touches on something which we share as a common goal in our respective sort of professional lives, which is personalization. That is also a thing which is quite difficult for brands to grapple with at the beginning. I think AI technology will help us to distribute that more at scale, whether that's in the sort of simple blocking and tackling of an ops function, being able to more accurately QA systematically, or even in the creation of templates and the iteration of content. Can you talk a little bit about how you think about the templated approach, what AI might be able to bring to personalization as it relates to efficiency and effectiveness?
Yes, I think we approach it, and specifically I come from this angle from what does audio production look like. And I myself like to look at it from this paradox of time, cost, and scale. And in traditional means, you wouldn't be able to do both. If you wanted to have scale, it will cost a lot and it will take a lot of time. If you want to do something very fast, you might not get the scale, and it will be fine, but it will just be a single asset, right? And so when it comes to personalization, that obviously works against that. So, but I do think that with AI, you have the ability to achieve all three, because you have the ability to scale within less time, but also it costs you less. So suddenly, you remove some of the barriers and obstacles, particularly in audio, because it's a voice enacted ability. And I guess having a voice over, reading out hundreds and hundreds of lines is an efficient use of their time. And I feel like it combines then the creativity, particularly when we look at personalization and tapping into those moments and changing the creative experience of a listener or a viewer, where it's a visual format that has audio narration over the top of it. And I think that are some of the things where AI incredibly can help, because they're not necessarily creative tasks, they're repetitive tasks again, but they yield in more creativity.
Yeah, I think we as an agency have found that audio is the natural place to start. Going back to the earlier question about where do brands sort of dip a toe in, audio is, I would say, one of the least complicated media in which to dip the toe, because there aren't the sophisticated challenges of lip syncing and digital avatar simulation. And it is something which is very convincing in some ways, but that leads to the corollary of, okay, there are benefits, which we've talked about, speed, efficiency, production efficiencies. What are the costs or the risks associated with it? We hear many brands talking about their ethical stance around it, and I think they're feeling that out at the moment. What do you think the right sort of guidance for brands is in navigating that line of opportunity versus risk?
I find that topic is probably the biggest obstacle still, particularly when it comes to AI, is how do I ensure as a brand that this is ethical, but also safe and secure for what I want to do. And at least at AudioStack, we put this at the highest part of priorities of what we do. AudioStack is built by design as a safe AI tooling. So I think there also needs to be, then from our perspective, more education, but also more regulatory bodies, involvement with regulatory bodies. For example, one of the things that we're doing, we have the highest security, we are SOC 2 certified, GDPR, TCF 2.0 framework, but also working with the Content Authority Initiative, or applying the in terms of ethical use of AI, the 3 Cs. Consent is all about consent. You cannot just use something for the sake of using or training algorithms or models. And I think that's incredibly important, hence why the safety and security. Collaboration and control. You need to have the ability to collaborate, and that's why I was talking about with regulatory bodies. But also we, for example, at AudioStack teamed up with the Cambridge University to understand what are some of the bias of AI in different regions, for example, to kind of give more education. And when it comes to the third one around control, you need to be able to control your data sets and how you feed them and how you make them secure, and how can you, for example, if it's a sandbox that a brand or an agency has the ability to delete everything within that, so there's nothing gets out of that in terms of a walled garden. But I think it's incredibly important, and if if there's more bad player in the space, I think it will ruin it for a lot of people, and the opportunity actually will have.
I agree. And I want to touch on the third C of control there in a second, because I think agencies have sort of installed processes, especially I suppose on the creative side, there are ways of working which are quite ingrained. And I suppose my question would be, how do you work these novel techniques into ingrained agency processes such that they will, be confident to try it and actually weave those in at scale thereafter?
I think processes are an absolute key, right? Because the AI will do it in seconds. But how do you, like your question, how do you make sure that the process, and I think it's about the scoping, well, what is your process? And how do you then make at every touch point that you might have, make sure that it is right in terms of legalities, in terms of consent, in terms of how the model's been trained, how it's been applied, how it's been used. And you weave that in so that you build a framework, and I guess that maybe mean a new framework. Having said all that, I would want to pose a question. We're talking about AI, but what about, I don't want to say traditional ad tech, but the ad tech that is currently there? How much of that are we actually looking in terms of security and safety? Yes, we have GDPR legislation and TCF, but there are still a lot of bad players. If you look at the ANA report that was released last year about the use of FMA sites, right? So like when it comes to AI, I almost feel like we are way too, like I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it's like almost like we're too critical because it's a new topic. Yet when it comes to the advertising that flows through the different programmatic pipes, they're flowing through, and we will analyze them based on measurements and based on results.
That's really interesting. And a parallel is coming to mind, which is it's like the cryptocurrency space versus the traditional financial system, which is heavily regulated versus crypto unregulated. And there have been plenty of bad actors, famously in the press over the past few years, which I think has done damage to the broader distributed system. And there's probably a parallel to be drawn with our industry too. But I think the difference with traditional ad tech is that we know what it can do. It's been doing what it's been doing for some time now. I think the slightly scary but exciting thing about the AI capabilities is that we don't quite know the boundaries of what it might do, or indeed the pace at which it's going to be able to do it. And so I feel we're grappling as an industry with that. And the point about process, I think, is key. We have a very crisp process which brings logic to the magic that we see in our LinkedIn feeds. How do you guide clients through that process of thinking structure without just thinking, oh, well, I can press the magic AI button and magic will occur?
I think it's taking them on the journey with you. It's when they, so I'll give you an example. We had a activity where we were able to, or the client wanted to also license their brand voice AI voice model. And so they had never done this before. And so we took them on the journey with us, what that means from a legal perspective, from a contracting perspective, and how that would look like. So there were a lot of, obviously, conversations involved, how that is, like in terms of with different stakeholders at different points with the client itself, be it from marketing to procurement to the legal teams. And I think in that way, it's very traditional when you take someone with you on a journey to explore something. And then also, I think, coming really from the perspective of, yes, we are a AI audio production infrastructure that wants to have more like clients, right? But it's also more around what is the right solution for this right moment, right? And coming from a more perspective of, I would like to educate you in this kind of project or activity itself, because it's not just this specific single campaign. It's actually like what is further ahead in 3 to 5 years' time or in a year's time that I can now instill in terms of how it's the right way to use AI, how you can obtain consent, how you make sure that everything is safe in terms of the data that you apply, in terms of the data that you share, where do you share it? And I think it's like almost like this is not a sprint, this is a marathon type of analysis. So I think in that way, I really enjoy, like, what is the value exchange? Yes, I am, you are using our infrastructure, our technology, but also what is beyond that? And I think that comes back to the collaboration efforts of the kind of framework. how do you make sure that you collaborate? How do you exchange value and experience and knowledge?
I like that, and I'm going to pair it with and it's a bit of a shameless plug, apologies, for the Wavemaker addressable product. And the reason we think of it this way is that you need a framework, you need a lattice or some sort of scaffold on which you can bolt other things. And we have found an addressable strategy is exactly that. Should you have a separate data strategy, it fits very nicely onto our context, audience, and content sort of triumvirate, if you like. And it's the same thing, I think, with innovation opportunities, of which AI is obviously a major one at the moment. That's the sort of base for our logic, and then other things get attached to that. So that's definitely something which I would plug to our dear audience. Secondly, finally, because we're slightly running out of time, how do you think brands can use AI to optimize the media spend, the pure media side of the business? How could that look in the future, and how would you have some involvement in that from an AudioStack perspective?
Interesting question from just a pure media perspective. Maybe I can talk a bit about the media and then the creative itself. In terms of optimization, I mean, we talk about addressability. You head up the addressable product. But before we talked about dynamic creative optimization. And I do feel there is something about the optimization part, that whilst not every brand does addressability, there is something that I think the optimization, the O part, will help them do more addressability. And what I'm trying to say by that is, if we could somehow, and this is never going to be perfect 100%, right? But really try, how can we close the cycle of, we start with a media campaign that's targeted, we identify the moments in your template, in your framework, you build the creative based on that. But then as the activity is running, you are optimizing consistently, not just in terms of the media spend, but also in the creative experience that you can create. And again, all of that can be underpinned by AI, because nothing is real time, but as close to real time as possible, to then evolve from that. And then it's almost like how AI is trained, right? It evolves, it starts and it learns. And I think if we can, and perhaps that already exists in some stages, but I think that would be fantastic in terms of the future. Also moving away from campaign by campaign by campaign, and actually looking at, I guess what you guys working with your clients on as well, is like more holistic approach. A holistic approach of, yes, you have this event or this promotion here, but in fact, holistically, how does this work in channel or formats, and how can you apply it across both media and creative? Because I do think they need to come closer together. If they probably have over the past 5 years come closer together because of technology, but I do think there's more to be done, and I think AI perhaps is one of the keys that can unlock some of that to bring them closer together.
I agree with that. I think addressability is the only place in advertising, dare I say, slightly provocatively, very Wavemaker of me to do so, it's the only place in advertising where media and creative come together and are actually joined through data. And I feel that gives us the opportunity to use that data to close the loop, to ask the so what questions. What just happened and what should we do differently? How do we dial down underperformance? But also, to your point about always on, through the communications calendar, across the media plan, through the funnel, it's optimizing the sort of outcomes using creative analytics to understand what resonated with which audiences, feed those insights back into the addressable strategy and sort of start again. And I suppose that sort of fusion of media and creative, for me, is accelerated by AI. I'm not sure exactly where that goes or the pace at which it's accelerated, but it feels as though the net trend is onward.
Absolutely.
So, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we've come to the end of our allocated slot. It's been wonderful catching up with you, Silke. Thank you so much for sharing some fascinating insights. I look forward to doing much more work with you in the coming years.
Thank you.
So thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks for being with us, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Cannes.